Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another Breaking into Data session. I'm Aaron Falus, founder of Promotable, and also your host for tonight's session. Got Chris on the line as well. But before we get started, I'm going to send everyone off into the networking table session, and then we'll kick off the conversation at about 6. And then feel free to, when we do that, or even beforehand, feel free to throw your questions into the chat, then when we get started, you can also raise your hand. We'll bring you on. I'd love to keep the conversation going. And with that, let's click the little roundtable button. And okay, we're all back. Hope you had some interesting conversations here. So as I mentioned before, Aaron Falus, founder of Promotable, and also your host for this Breaking into Data series. We've got Chris Klause on the line, which is kind of weird because we're on video, but is what it is. But Chris has got a really amazing career. Right now, he is a senior data science specialist, right, at Talend. But I mean, you've worked at the big national lab that I just can't remember the name right now. Like Motorola. Like, I mean, you also teach a couple classes, right? I mean, so I'm like understating it, but what like attracted me is that like you've got like all these diverse experiences that I find super interesting. And I think for a lot of folks who are trying to figure out like what's next, whether it's how do we break into data, or it's like, hey, right now I'm in that like junior data scientist kind of stage. Like, how do I get to that next? Like, what does being a manager look like? What does that mean? To like, we'll jump into it later. Like, for a lot of us, kind of one of the topics I'm going to be hitting on is like, we think of like, oh, like for most like non-data people, non-tech people, they think, oh, data science is just Tableau, right? It's like making a pretty dashboard. And then, I always A/B test everyone, and I'm like, every data scientist I talk to, I'm like, tell me how much of your job is what you thought it would be setting up, and how much of it is just like basic data cleansing. And it's like 70%, like 60 to 70% on average. So with that, we'll hand it off. Chris, you want to just kind of give a brief intro on kind of you, your background, and can tell us a little more about Talend and what you guys do there, and then we'll jump in.
Sure, sounds great. I'm Chris Klause. As you mentioned, I'm with Talend at the moment as a data science specialist. I've been in quite a few different industries. I started out my career at Argonne National Lab, so I was there for a decade doing research science of different types, from looking at maglev coils and the force and guidance on those tracks for levitating trains to watching melting reactor cores in a computational model and seeing what would happen, how could you stop that China syndrome, to chemical warfare agent sensors, creating the neural network that would go ahead and allow it to train in the field. And then I moved on to Monster.com, doing 25,000 lead development sites. How do you go ahead and manage tons of sites to go ahead and oh, sorry, someone's at the door. And now you'll hear my dog barking. But how to go ahead and manage to track all that data about all those people on different sites and start to congeal a uniform view of those. In this case, it was education sites of those potential students. So you're gathering some from one site and another site they get onto, and you're doing this pixel tracking stuff. So to getting into healthcare, I was director IT at a medical clinic for a good 3 years, and went ahead and built a data center, virtualized my servers, went ahead and was integrating the data. So a lot of data engineering between those different systems. Then I got back into research for a while. I was at a cyber defense lab at Western Kentucky University, and we were working with the Army Research Lab. So all the Army bases and even their operations overseas. We were monitoring the network traffic, looking for hackers who were trying to find out what they were doing and trying to break in and steal DoD information. After that, I went back into healthcare and was an interface engine, or interface, what was it called? We were working with interface engines, and it was data engineering again. But it was moving data in real time. So ESB kind of work, moving X12 files, HL7 files to the claims providers to say, hey, here's what's really happening with our patients. And being very amused that the claim providers would switch up the data format every once in a while to try to catch you so that you wouldn't make the timeline to get your charges in.
Oh, so they could save money and not to pay it out. or delay it by 12 months or whatever. Oh, that's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a nerd, so I hear that as like, I think in the industry, they'd probably call it working capital optimization.
It was pure evil. It was just hilarious. So we'd have all the different formats they'd ever done before, and we'd be flipping back. Did they switch it back to this one? Maybe that one.
And you never knew what you were supposed to do. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's something you'd expect from an insurance company, right? If there's someone who wants to not pay out and like their entire business is paying out, yeah.
At that same organization, I then went ahead and was doing a data warehousing project. We were trying to get a 360-degree view of our patients, so master data management. And I was working with a vendor at the time, and they liked me so much they stole me away. So then I got into pre-sales, which amazingly, pre-sales is a lot like being in research. There's some differences because you're selling, but it's like you go from project to project, you look at the challenges, you pitch ideas about it, and it's like you're in science, you're writing the proposals, but here you're just you're presenting your proposal and trying to solve the customer's challenges. And then once you get to the point, the good part about the pre-sales, when you get to the point that, okay, they're convinced, hey, there's post-sales.
Let me introduce you to your account manager, and they'll handle all the I don't feel like dealing with all of your stupid things. Yeah. Then there's different conversation about how those handoffs sometimes don't work particularly well. But that was one of the things that I found really interesting was like most people are trying to do the opposite transition of what you did, right? Most people are like, I'm in sales or marketing and I want to go into data. And you did kind of the opposite, right? Where I'd say pre-sales, it kind of feels more like you are in like a management role, if you will, in the sense of like really from that like perspective. It's like, how do we solve this big business problem and leverage these tools? But it's ironic because I think that's the way it almost should be, because you actually get their problems. But I think we don't do enough on like the sales side to like help someone, like, because every time I meet someone who actually understands like the product they sell and like the pain points of that industry, they're not selling me anymore, right? They're solving my problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the true goal of a good pre-sales person is you're selling the solution rather than the product or it's like you're not trying to solve one little irritating data quality problem. You're looking, hey, what is your overall problem? Oh, you're a state police department and you have the police going to these different houses to serve warrants. Well, what are the issues you have with that? Oh, 3% of the people you get warrants for are dead. And you don't know their spouses have concealed weapons. Well, both of those could cause problems. One's a waste of time for the officer, and how much time do you waste on that? The other one is a risk of their life, and maybe the people inside the house. It's like, yeah, so you start to realize what those problems are, and then you can pull that data together into a nice solution. Would
you say that, because now just because you see like a variety of different like organizations and problems, right? Would you say the challenge is more collecting data or getting to the point where it's like this is here somewhere. We get it through some form or whatever, and the bigger problem is just putting it into one place that we can then actually potentially clean it and or do something with it.
I would say it's getting to the data is a big challenge, and then cleaning the data is probably the next largest challenge. Getting it to somewhere isn't really that much of a problem. It's more of, okay, I need to go ahead and get this data into some kind of format where it's usable. That's always been, whenever I do data science work, that's the problem. It's like, do I have good data? No. Then I have junk data science. Garbage in, garbage out.
And how often does like your, I guess, management team like not understand that part when they actually hire you on? Are they usually like, oh yeah, we have this data, it's great, just go make us some money with it? Or is it like, we have this stuff and we know that there are some issues, or like, tell us what else you need to actually do something good with it? Or how does that usually work?
I would say no one ever realizes how bad it's going to be. Even me. It's like, I'll go ahead and if I, like, after I've been at a place for 3 years, if it's a new data project and I take a look at it, if I haven't been working closely with that data, I'll make assumptions and I won't be always right. And it will turn out that there'll be bigger problems than I thought I would encounter. And I always go ahead and factor in there's an unknown problem that's going to appear, or a bunch of them.
What's common, like before it even gets to a data scientist, like who's involved, and like what are the biggest bottlenecks, or just like you look at this and you're just like, want to slam your head on the table?
So probably the generic term would be a data engineer. Mm-hmm. And so depending on industry, it might be easy for that data engineer to just go in and from whatever vendor system, mm-hmm. connect to it, hit that database and start to pull the data, or hit flat files, pull the data, or hit a message queue, or a REST service or SOAP service or something like that. So there's a variety of ways where that data could live.
Yeah.
If you're a happy data engineer, you can just go grab it and start to run with it. Now, in some industries, that's not as fun. It's like you'll have vendors who lock things down, and then you're having much more difficulty just getting at the data.
Well, my next question was talking about the difference between working at like a non-heavily regulated industry, right, versus like if you're in healthcare or in insurance, or DoD. That's like a different level of I'm sure security. But what, as like working in data, what's like obviously it's not one big difference, but I'm sure there's lots of them. But tell us about like kind of what that dichotomy looks like.
So with like the healthcare is an easy one to talk about. You can't go ahead and write over the data in those electronic medical record systems. It's like, so if you're doing data cleansing, you're wanting a data warehouse that's outside of that. Now, you probably would want that anyway, but in some industries, it's like it's okay to go back and write over that data. And these are things where it's like, okay, no, I can't do that. And then you start to get into, okay, I've got regulations for HIPAA, but then I've also got concerns about retention. How long can I keep the data? Or how long do I want to keep the data? Because I might have people come and serve lawsuits or want to find that data. And if it's past a date where I would get sued over it, get rid of that data if I don't have to keep it.
How often do companies have because I think one thing, and sorry to cut you off, but this is like an interesting point where I feel like a lot of companies today are like, because data is like the hot thing, it's like, let's just get as much data as we can. How many companies are like proactive about trimming it? Because think of like the amount of compute that you use. Like every single time you want to, like, you're infinitely adding more. Do you find that companies are starting to be more proactive, or are we still in that point of like, let's just get as much as we can and figure it out later?
I would say some of the larger companies, or those in more litigious industries, mm-hmm. ones where they're a little more afraid of someone coming to sue them, mm-hmm. they are starting to really move that direction. But I would say overall that most still keep as much data as you can. And I have to admit, I'm a pack rat. I would like to keep all the data.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have a fear of any consequences from keeping it, then yeah.
Is there like a critical mass? Because obviously, you don't want no data because you can't model if you don't have a large enough data set. But what's like, I don't know if it's hard to put a number on it or quantify it, but like, is there like a place where you're like, I know we have enough and now we don't need more necessarily, or we can update it, but we don't need to like, add billions more rows just for the sake of it?
Well, there's enough to do training with.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, hey, my training needs to change over time, because trends can change. And so that then brings up the interesting problem of, well, do I want to track the changes of those trends over time? So not just that I'm doing my modeling based on what people would behave like right now, and then a couple years down the line, I do it again. And then again, a couple more years down the line, well, maybe if I keep all that data, I could try to do a predictive analytics on that as well. Now, is that project worthwhile, though? Probably not.
Well, there is the crux of like so many conversations that we had. We had an entire talk. This was someone from Discover, but it was like there's a point where like we're all nerds, right? So there's some things that are like they're cool, but does this have business value, and how do we even talk about that, or how do we? Because the other question is like sometimes you get, especially from like the technical side of like, why doesn't my stakeholder understand how important this is? Before we even jump into that, I want to start grabbing some of these questions here. Gil asked, what are good projects for people who want to grow specifically in data engineering? And I would add on top of that, for everyone who maybe is less familiar, because I know we kind of jumped the gun, talk a little bit about like what's the difference between data science and data engineering? Because I think sometimes we kind of lump them all together, and it's a huge difference, right? It's not really the same thing.
Yeah, I would almost classify data engineering as the plumbing, moving the data around, going ahead and fixing it, cleaning it. So you got your data integration, your data quality, and if you climb up that chain, you've got data governance. So having a full management structure for how do I work with data and what do I do with my metadata? And how do I have transparency into data lineage and impact analysis of all my data? If I have that holistic view of data, now I have trust when I get that data into a point where I want to do data science. And data science gets into, well, it could be something simple. It could be descriptive analytics. I want my pretty BI reports in Tableau. Or it could be, hey, I want to start to do predictive analytics. I want to see what, if I continue on my path of what I'm doing right now, what will happen 5-10 years down the line? Or maybe I want to go even further. Maybe I want to do prescriptive analytics. And I want to see what will go ahead and happen if I change my behavior. And how can I optimize that? Where's the best situation I could do for my business or my project or whatever I happen to be working on? And I would say data science is really looking at that holistic picture. What data do I have? And what can I do with it to improve my business? It's working with hand in hand with the business execs to say, what are your pain points? And then saying, okay, now that I understand your pain points, here are models I think that would help us to go ahead and address those.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. For folks, if anyone else has any other questions, you've got two options. You can either throw them into the chat, or you can request the mic, and you can actually join the conversation. So feel free to do either. Richard, I've got your question coming up as well. If you want to grab the mic, let me know. Otherwise, just throw in the chat and let me know that you want me to just ask. He wants the mic. Excellent.
Cool.
And I think that means he's picking up. Yeah.
we struggle with is unintended consequences, right? This issue of building in.
I'm going to pause you for a second, Richard. There was a little bit of a lag, so we caught kind of the middle of your sentence. I'm just starting over.
Walk slow from New York or Connecticut. You talk about scope creep, and in projects that I've led, there's always going to be unintended consequences.
Yeah.
You had talked about something about building it in or accounting for it or doing something, not that you have a crystal ball, but, a project that's a deliverable and you're behind, you have to have some account for why. So how do you address it?
Yeah, I always encourage having a strong project plan at the beginning of any project with what are my milestones, what are my deliverables. If I have that, then whenever anyone comes to me and say, oh, we now need to go ahead and add this new criteria, this new milestone, I can say, okay, but we need to go ahead and adjust our project timeline, or we need to go ahead and reduce some of these other milestones to accommodate for that. If you don't do that, then it's like a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, suddenly becomes yeah.
Been there. Coming down. You have 2 more weeks? What? 2 more weeks? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And then
Gil's question, I don't think we ever answered.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
Yeah. What's a good data engineering project? So I would say Kaggle has some really good ones out there. And I would encourage going there to. Hold it! I'm thinking data science, data engineering. Okay, data engineering projects. There is a Snowflake Talend trial where you can go ahead and get a trial of both Snowflake and Talend and be able to play with both of them. And so, since Snowflake is like the new hot potato for where can I store data and move data around with. And Talend is one of those data engineering fabrics to go ahead and do data integration and data quality. Being able to use both of them is kind of cool. So I would encourage doing something like that where you can get into a new data set or new database format that you haven't experienced before, or something that's more on the hot edge. Like if you do a trial of AWS or a trial of the Google Cloud Platform, and then get a trial of one of these data integration, data quality tools. Then you can start to say, okay, now I've got hold of the tools that I can play with. Now what kind of project am I going to do? There's a lot of great data sets out there, live data sets that you can feed, like the cell towers for all across North America. You can get the pings from those, of what their locations are. Or there's places where you can get live feeds of the traffic, or the live weather feeds, or the shipping, the ships, routing of ships and stuff like that. Do you have to have a programming background to get into data engineering? It helps. It helps to have a programming background, just like it helps to have a mathematics or some kind of science background to get into data science. That said, the tools are becoming easier and easier. And I would, in fact, say that now it's at the point where what Kimball said about a decade ago, he was saying at the time that don't go ahead and hand code your data engineering, your data integration efforts. Use an ETL tool. That most of the time that will be more appropriate. And it was because of maintenance and operations, not because of the speed of development necessarily. Now that's been going on for a decade that those tools have improved. Well, now I can drag and drop things and make it very easy with a graphical interface to build something. It's nice to have the programming knowledge to know when I'm building that, what kind of loops I might be creating or stuff like that, or what kind of problems I might run into. And I still usually have to do a little snippet of coding here or there on some of the components, but most of it is drag and drop. I'm looking for 5 years down the future where I can put on my Oculus and go ahead and grab hold of my database and connect them together. And
go all Star Trek on it. That's how you know I'm a real nerd. No, that's a good point, and awesome, Gil. But what I was going to say is obviously it helps, but I mean, before doing this, I used to run ops for a coding bootcamp out in San Francisco, and we take a lot of people who, like, it helps to have a programming background, and you can pick it up, and usually it's people who either have strong like STEM background and strong math background, or if anyone here is a lawyer, like people who think super logically, pick up coding really well and pick up programming engineering really well if you want. You have to really want it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you're totally changing industries, you have to work really hard. But for certain people with whatever kinds of training, super logical thought processes, like to a certain extent, it's like shocking how like lawyering and engineering are like not that different. It's just if-then statements all day long.
In fact, there's another field that I've seen do really good in programming, which is kind of amusing. Those that have to have creative thought, usually, which you think of STEM automatically, but I've run into some musicians.
Yes. Actually, there's I forgot his name. He's an engineer, or was anyway, at Asana, and he was like in music theory. And it made no sense to me, but there's actually a Financial Times article about him. He went through our boot camp, and I was just like, how does this make any sense? In hindsight, it makes tons of sense. But usually it's like, every now and then it's like really artsy people, or in this case, music people, just the way their heads wired. I don't have that kind of skill set where I can pick these kinds of things up like that. But for a lot of people, it's like, I think it's a combination of, like, you have to really want it, and by really want it, I don't mean like you take one like free data camp class. I mean you do it for like 300 hours. It's like you want more than other things. But if you have that drive and you have that background, it makes it a little bit easier to pick things up. But here's something else. Like, what do you think people aren't learning enough of? Because I think one of the questions that I always find, like one of the things that when I talk to people who are directors of data science or what have you, I always ask, like, what do you think is like the missing skill set? Or you're looking at resumes, like what's the thing that like is like, you're like, oh, this is whatever, this is fine, and what's like that thing? And most of the time it's not technical at all. They're like, I want someone who understands what they're doing and why they're doing it, and that I can make them a better coder. They can go take a class and get better at SQL or whatever.
There are two different branches of that. Mm-hmm. One is technical, but it's not comp sci technical, and the other one is not technical at all. The non-technical would be soft skills. Mm-hmm. If you're doing data science, or even if you're doing data engineering, you got to have certain soft skills to be able to extract from your business users what the needs are. Because even with data engineering, you're doing a lot of data quality work, which means that you have to work directly with those end users.
Is there like an example that you have where, because I think what we're getting at is like the stakeholders ask you for things and they don't really translate that into something that makes sense for what you do. What's like a common example that you run into, whether something that was in your previous roles or something you ran into a lot with Talend?
Could you rephrase that a little bit for me?
Yeah. So like when we talk about like oftentimes we'll get something like so an example we had this was probably a year ago now, a long time ago. We had someone who basically the whole talk was about asking a data-driven question. How do you get a question that actually matters, right? And so like he'll say like, oh, people, my superiors will say like, we want more revenue. And he's like, what does that mean? Higher margin revenue? Revenue from, you want people to reduce, do you want to reduce burn and increase margin? Do you want a particular segment to increase? Whereas like, I was kind of going off of what you were talking about, where it's like stakeholders, your business partners, want something, whether it's for data governance or something else, they don't really know how to articulate it in a way that they don't understand what you have to do to do that. They're just like, I want this way. And they have no idea if that's a year or an hour.
And amusingly, this dovetails into the other skill set that I think is important. which is certain types of mathematics. I had the good fortune to work with Ralph Keeney, who is the one of the founding fathers for decision sciences. And it is a mathematical method of going in ahead and extracting weights from stakeholders. So you ask back and forth. It's a trade-off analysis to go ahead and say, okay, how much more of this, like speed of a car, if I speed up the car a little bit more, how much is that worth to you versus the safety of the car? If I lose a little safety, is it good if I go ahead and increase the speed by 20% more? And that was probably one of my most fun projects early in my career, was working with him and watching him work with the military to do stakeholder analysis for a land management project, and asking different military people, oh, you need to have sniper training on your military base? What's important for that? Oh, it's forest edge. Well, if I have this much forest edge, is that good enough? Does it plateau after that? Or double the amount of forest edge is double the value? And it's like going back and forth to go ahead and start to create a curve, a function that would go ahead and represent their value for different amounts of sniper edge. And then he did the same thing with the tank trainers. Oh, you need contiguous planes for tanks. And then he got hold of the military legal people, and they were like, endangered crickets, we're legally responsible for this. Okay. How much cricket area do you need?
How much is a cricket worth?
Yeah.
How much can we afford to get sued by? It's funny you talk about that sort of like optimization where it's like, is this worth it? I mean, a more simple example is like for anyone who, like, I'm not a car guy, but I've seen my fair share of these like car videos where you watch these people and there's a button sometimes to turn the traction control off. And I'm like, well, that seems safe. And I'm like, but does it make it more fun? Is that worth it? Is it like, if you have a 0.5% chance of dying today, is that worth it to have like 100% more fun in your drive? And depends how you value it. But yeah, I mean, I guess other kind of interesting question that kind of comes to mind is like, what's been like the biggest, I guess, challenge or just difference in like moving from like a pure play data and or research role into moving into this like sales role? And I guess what's been the thing that was most surprising? Is a second question that I think could be an interesting follow-up.
I'd say I had 3 culture shocks through my career. The first was moving from a research environment out of the ivory tower into business. It's like just normal business, not sales yet.
Yeah.
And it was so weird to go ahead and make that move, because it's like you're busy thinking about, hey, these big problems, what I want to solve, and chasing after funding to go ahead and do your research and manipulating the data, getting papers out to go ahead and show that what you were trying to do, you've succeeded at doing, and talking to others about it and going to these conferences. And it felt a lot like a university in some ways, but at the next level. Well, I then switched over to business, and it was like, yeah, this is working good enough. We've got the quarter to think about for Wall Street. and
up our EBITDA.
Yeah, and there were different challenges, but the challenge all revolved around, will this make us money? Rather than what's the best solution, or to just explore and try to figure things out. It was, okay, will this go ahead and bring us in more leads? Will it bring us in more money? How can we get the most money? Oh, a bad-looking site for these microsites for educational leads gives us more money than a good-looking site? Let's go that route. Yeah, which was amusing. If it looked a little more homegrown, it got more people, more traction from users.
It's super interesting. I mean, we can, it's a A/B testing conversation.
Yeah,
but that's like a really clear example. I'm always looking for a good one. That's both amusing and I think a good one.
But then the other cultural shock was, okay, now I've been in business for, it'd been at least a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Now to go into sales, the dark side. And the experience from the sales side and realizing how mean I did to vendors before. When I go, you have this distance metric in your product. Without that, I can't do this or that.
Oh, God.
Your tactics then change significantly of, hey, I'm looking for pain points and I'm looking for challenges rather than I'm thinking about the bottom line necessarily. Yes, I'm going for the sale, but I'm not thinking necessarily about the sale when I'm going after that customer. I'm thinking about what is the solution? What is the problem? Which gets much closer back to that research field. What's the challenge? Let me fix it.
Which is actually an interesting. We talked about insights earlier. That's something that you don't really think about, right? When I think of a salesperson, I'm like, this person, all they care about is like closing the deal, handing me off to the next person, and making the commission. But like the reality is sometimes it's like the fact that it's like there's similarities to a research role is both interesting and I asked earlier about things that were unexpected.
Yeah, well, there is a definite divorce in sales and pre-sales. Mm-hmm. If you are the technical side who's doing the technical sales, I never talk about dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. I never talk about the price tag. I'm your advocate on the vendor side. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I am showing you what the solution can do. I'm teaching you what it can do. I'm going ahead and showing you. I'm playing with the toy if we're wanting to play with it. But I'm not. I tried to divorce myself completely from the dollar amount discussion because that's not my turf. That's the account executive.
Yeah.
And so I can be completely honest with you of, yes, we can do this one. No, we can't do this one. But here's why I still believe this is what you should buy. And and that's part of my choice of why I pick which companies I work with. I think they're the best at data integration, data quality. And so it's like, those are fun tools to play with.
Yeah. It's nice when you're selling something you actually believe in because then you're not selling anymore. You're just solving problems. That's how you know talking to someone who's actually good at their job. When you realize they're no longer pushing anything, they're like, you could do this. It's like going to be cheaper, and these are problems you'll probably see. Don't take my word for it. Go try it and come back. We're a little more expensive probably. I don't know how much, but more expensive. But like, here's the things I know we're really good at, and I can say that because, I've done this for a while, right? I was you. And I think the last curiosities that I have, and if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to either request the mic or drop it in the chat. But I'm curious about some of the classes that you teach over at WashU. It's primarily like executive kind of or managers, right?
No, it's kind of a mix. It is professionals. So people who at Monsanto or Federal Reserve or other big companies down in the St. Louis area, mm-hmm. They'll send their staff over to WashU mm-hmm. to get continuing credits and maybe certifications in different areas. So WashU has various certifications, and the one I got involved in was for the data engineering and data science. And so my classes kind of hit that spectrum. It's like I've got a data prep and data stewardship class. I've got a data quality class. I've got a data governance class, master data management. Mm-hmm. Then I've got classes that are, hey, let's go ahead and work on more on the coding side instead of using tools. So Python classes that go ahead and look at different use cases along there. Let's do predictive analytics and things like that.
Interesting. Well, we're like the, it's one thing to say if you want to get a little bit better at Python, but are there a couple of like main like hot topics of like, hey, these are like the problems we're looking to solve with this kind of training? Is there like some sort of like overarching themes that you typically get over and over?
There's certain themes I like to hit a lot, like mm-hmm. if I do predictive maintenance, mm-hmm. that one's an easy one for people to understand.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone who hopefully will come on in about a month or so. But he was at GE, and now he's at it's killing me. I forget where he's at now. But that was like the conversation. It was like, hey, if we have a jet engine, how long is it typically last? And then after that, it's still good, but you need whatever. Like, yeah, I mean, the goal is to sell the engine at cost and make a bunch of margin on the services side, I assume. And it was super interesting. To me, it's also one of the things that makes the most sense.
Yeah, or like the wind farms that you see now. It's like when one of those turbines goes down, they have to have extras sitting there. Well, if you start to go ahead and put the little force accelerometers in those windmills and measure the vibrations and keep track of the temperature, well, now you can start to do predictive maintenance and say, hey, before it even goes down, I'm able to go fix that turbine and correct it, so I don't have to have as many turbines sitting on the sidelines.
What's interesting you bring that up. I had never really been that close to one of these wind farms, and we were driving through on the way to like Joshua Tree, so kind of in that area, and it was like just outside of Palm Springs, and I'd say it was like a mile and a half of just like these things, and they're like, I mean, these blades are huge. So I can only imagine if something breaks off, you have this like 30-foot very sharp blade flying off. I mean, I'd be curious if the lawsuits, but that's a whole other ballgame. Like, how many times would one of these have to fall before we decided it was time to invest in predictive maintenance?
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to watch where that's going. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them don't have the turbines anymore. It's just the wobbling.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a newer one that's been made it's really cool how it's acting, so you don't have that spinning.
And this is how you know we're both really big nerds. Because I'm having an engaging conversation about windmills. I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks a lot for everyone for joining us per usual. For anyone who had signed up for tomorrow's event, that's actually going to be postponed. I'll be sending out an email, but we'll be back again next week, where we're going to be talking about insurance. We've got an AVP on the data side from the Hartford, and she was previously at Allstate. Really cool. So it'll be a good conversation with that. Thanks, Chris. This was a lot of fun. I think always a conversation with you is always both worthwhile in terms of learning stuff, but also just an enjoyable conversation. And hopefully, I think everyone else agrees. And with that, we're going to sign off. Again, everyone, I'm Aaron Fallouse, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. It was great to be here.
All right.